Human rights activists often compare the modern penal system in Russia to the Soviet Gulag. This comparison is fueled by scandals involving torture and the Federal Penitentiary Service ideas about using prisoners for construction projects, such as Baikal-Amur main line. In this video, I'm gonna explain how the first labor camps appeared in the USSR, how did they use prisoners' labors, and whether modern colonies have similarities to the Gulag. The Federal Penitentiary Service, or in Russian we call it FSIN, in some ways inherits the Gulag, but the number of prisoners in Soviet prisons significantly exceeded the current number. In October 2023, Deputy Minister of Justice Vsevolod Vukolov announced a record reduction in the number of prisoners in Russian prisons. In correctional colonies, there were 266,000 of people at the same time, he said. According to the same official, 10 years ago, there were about 700,000 people in places of detention. At the same time, according to historians, between 20 and 25 million people passed through the Gulag during its existence. 2 million of them lost their lives in the camps. According to the estimates by the Institute of Demography at the Higher School of Economics, every 15th prisoner died in the Gulag. The largest number of prisoners in the camps was recorded in 1953, 26 million of people. The Gulag network consisted of approximately 500 camp administrations, which oversaw hundreds of camps branches and points, totaling over 30,000 camps. In 2021, the possibility of involving prisoners in the construction of the Baikal-Amur main line was once again discussed. At that time, FSIN declared its readiness to create labor camps at large sites where labor was needed. In one way or another, prisoner labor is still used in Russian colonies, mainly in light industry, such as the production of workwear. In some colonies, prisoners now produce clothing for military personnel involved in the war in Ukraine, weaving camouflage nets. The head of Russia Behind Bars Foundation, Olga Romanova, speaks of several factors that have transferred from the Gulag to the modern penal system: outdated penitentiary infrastructure, a low level of personal training, a lack of transparency, antiquated views on the purpose of punishment, and the complete absence of resocialization. At the same time, she points out that administrative pressure on today's prisoners and the mass violation of their rights is not being done to build the White Sea Canal or bomb for national industrialization or to lift the country from its knees, like the Soviets were saying. The entire system is designed to ensure the private commercial interest of a group of people who receive salaries from the budget. Political repression continues in modern Russian colonies, just like in Stalin's camps. People are imprisoned for political reasons. According to another human rights organization called Memorial, about 11 to 15 million people were politically repressed throughout the USSR. The Human Rights Center continues to count political prisoners in modern Russia. Currently, there are 769 recognized political prisoners, and another 605 are being persecuted but not deprived of freedom. In 1999, when Vladimir Putin came to power, there was only one political prisoner in Russia, but during his time in power, human rights activists have counted 15,000 political prisoners. The highest number of politically motivated imprisonments occurred in Russia in 2019, and after the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, the number of women among political prisoners rose significantly to 27%. Human rights organization Memorial also notes that the list of those persecuted for political reasons in Russia is incomplete, as recognizing someone as a political prisoner follows specific criteria and takes time, which leaves many invisible. What definitely links the Russian current penitentiary system, or FSIN, to the Gulag is the presence of torture in the colonies. Prisoners are physically abused and forced to work beyond the norm without days off. But how did the Gulag appear in the USSR? The Gulag stands for the Main Camp Administration. An organization with that name was created in 1934, but the abbreviation began appearing in documents starting in 1930. From 1934, the Gulag controlled almost all places of detention in the Soviet Union and was subordinate to the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. As early as 1918, revolutionary leaders Vladimir Lenin and Lev Trotsky began planning the creation of concentration camps where the labor of class enemies could be used. On April 15, 1919, a resolution was adopted to create forced labor camps, and in the following year, the first camp of the future Gulag appeared on the White Sea. In 1929, the division of camps into political and criminal was abolished. they were combined into a single network. With the start of collectivization and industrialization, the network of camps expanded. In the first few months of dekulakization, alone about 60,000 repressed gulags, which basically means wealthy peasants, were sent to places of detentions. New camps were located where labor was needed. On Kolyma, where gold was mined, in the construction of a canal between the White and Baltic Seas, the White Sea Canal, and in the construction of the Baikal-Amur railway line, what they call BAM. BAM was created in 1932. The prisoners of this camp laid 190 kilometers of roads connecting BAM with the Trans-Siberian Railway. The most famous Gulag camp is Slon, which translates to English as an elephant. It was the first camp of the future Gulag system, which was located on the Solovetsky Islands on the territory of a former monastery and became one of the most famous places for the imprisonment of political regime opponents were sent exactly here. Members of anti-Bolshevik parties, representatives of the White movement. In 1923, the camp of Solovki received the name Slon, Solovetsky Special Purpose Camp, and became the center of the camp system in northern USSR. It was in this camp that the use of prisoner labor began. They felled trees, drained swamps, and built roads. In 1930, over 70,000 people were held there. During the camp's existence on Solovki, about 7,000 people died, not only due to harsh conditions, but also from known instances of tortures and executions. In memory of the political prisoners who died in Slon, Solovetsky stones have been installed in Solovki as well as in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Another famous labor camp is the Baikal-Amur Correctional Labor Camp, which was established in 1932. The labor of the camp's prisoners was used for the construction of the Baikal-Amur Railway. The camp at this railway was the largest Gulag camp in terms of prisoner numbers in 1938. When the camp was disbanded, it was reorganized into a separate structure that no longer belonged to the Gulag. At that time, it held more than 200,000 people. Prisoners brought from all over the USSR had to clear forests and lay a new railway in really harsh conditions, and they also mined gold. Bel-Balt-Lag, the White Sea Baltic Correctional Labor Camp, appeared in 1931. Prisoners in this camp were supposed to build a 227 kilometers canal connecting the White Sea to Lake Onega. By 1938, the canal was completed at the cost of at least 12,000 lives. In 1932, the camp had about 100,000 prisoners. It was in this camp that the word Zak came into the use. At that time, the term stood for Canal Army Prisoner. Nowadays, they pretty much call every prisoner Zak. Karlak, the Karaganda camp, was established in Kazakhstan in 1931. Karlak prisoners were involved in agriculture, metalworking, worked in glass industry, a sugar factory. The maximum number of prisoners was recorded in January 1949 and amounted to 65,673 people. Within Karlak, there was a subdivision called Algier, the Akmola camp for wives of traitors of the motherland, where the wives and children of enemies of the people, as they were called, were held, with more than 1,500 children born in this camp. Throughout the Gulag's history, it became the largest women's camp. However, Karlak ceased to exist in 1959. In 1940, the volume of camp production throughout the USSR reached 37 billion rubles. For comparison, a loaf of bread would cost you about 1 ruble, and a kilogram of buckwheat would cost you about 4.3 rubles. However, the use of forced labor in the Gulag was economically inefficient. In 1939, the state bank stated that the efficiency of construction and installation work on Gulag projects was nearly 4 times lower than on projects of the People Commissariat for Construction. Historian Oleg Khlevnyuk writes, "The costs of maintaining camps significantly increased the cost of labor from prisoners, and the cost of maintaining a prisoner was higher than the average salary of a free worker. For example, on the construction of the Volga-Don Canal in 1949, maintaining a prisoner cost 470 rubles a month, while their salary, calculated at the same rates as for the free workers, was 388 rubles. With the onset of the Great Terror, thousands of new prisoners were constantly sent to the Gulag. The camps were not prepared for such an influx, leading to a threefold increase in mortality among prisoners between 1936 and 1938. In 1942 to 1943, every fifth prisoner in the Gulag died. Historian Vladislav Stav, in an interview with Radio Liberty, said, "We can remember Shalamov describing how many people tried to stretch out eating bread as long as possible, sucking on it without even chewing. In the post-war Dalstroy, there were interruptions in supply, with only about 30% of the promised ration reaching to the camps. And indeed, in many camps, prisoners lacked food, clothing, soap, and other necessities, as well as tools for work." During World War II, some prisoners from the Gulag were sent to fight. However, after the war, new purges began in the Red Army, and the camps were filled with new prisoners, including Soviet POVs who had failed filtration. Their labor would be used in several major construction projects launched shortly after the war: the construction of the Volga-Don Canal, railroads between Salihard and Agarka, and on Sakhalin, among others. In 1953, after Stalin's death, an amnesty was declared, mainly affecting those convicted of minor criminal offenses, not political charges. Mass reviews of political cases would begin during Khrushchev's thaw. By 1962, more than 1 million people had been rehabilitated, according to KGB. The Gulag began to be dismantled in 1957. Several camps were closed at that time. Officially, the administration of the camps was disbanded on January 25, 1960, although labor camps remained, to which dissidents continued to be sent. Prisoners mainly worked in light industry, much like in today's colonies. And now, about the legacy of the Gulag. The Gulag left behind towns and villages that once sprang up around labor camps. Many of them are gradually dying out because they are no longer needed. For example, the population in Vorkuta has significantly decreased. There are still coal deposits there. Coal can still be mined, but no one needs it. Apart from coal, there is nothing there, so no one is going to maintain an entire city for coal that nobody needs. As a result, population there is now decreasing rapidly. Among the cities built by Gulag prisoners are Magadan, Ukhta, Komsomolsk-on-Amur, my hometown, Dubna, Nakhodka, Pechora, and Dubinka. Gulag prisoners built more than 100 airfields, dozens of hydroelectric power stations, and thousands of kilometers of roads. In 2022, a process began in Russia to reconsider decisions on the rehabilitation of victims of past political repressions. The Prosecutor General's office reviewed over 14,000 decisions, cancelling 4,000 of them. The rationale for this review was that among the rehabilitated were those who voluntarily joined paramilitary units of Wehrmacht and SS troops, served in punitive battalions and police units, or assisted the fascist occupies by working in the local government bodies they created. Russian prison system copies more and more from the Soviet gulags, and it seems like at some point it might become what it used to be. It was me, Dag the Russian. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to support Ukraine. They are fighting for their independence, so they wouldn't have to be in Russian gulags. There are ways to support the channel in the description below. Thank you and see you in the next ones.